everyone, and welcome once again to the ever-somber comic book vault. I'm Captain Logan.
And I am Dan.
And today, Dan and I are going to take a look at The Death of Superman. Dan, it is this week the 20th anniversary of Death of Superman.
That's crazy. It seems like it hasn't even been close to that amount of time since it was published.
Well, it makes me feel old.
Yeah. What year was this published in?
92.
92. Okay, so that was a year before I was born.
Wow. So, that really makes me feel old. As I've talked about before on Vaults and other things, Death of Superman is really the thing that got me into comic books, and more so Reign of the Supermen, because my first comic book was the issue that introduced Eradicator in Reign of the Supermen. So I had no idea what I was reading, but it looked cool. I was like, who's the? Because I knew what Superman was. I'd seen the one or two of the Superman movies, and it was like, but who's this guy with the visor, and why does he need that to use heat vision? And it's so weird. And but that really kind of got me into comics a lot, and so I went back and got to read Death of Superman. Got 75, and in fact I really remember vividly first getting Superman number 75. Because I went to a flea market. I was in Arkansas with my dad. I was seeing my dad for the summer, and he had booths at flea markets. And we went to this flea market, and somebody had Superman number 75 under glass for like $15-20, acting like it was really rare. And of course, it was one of the most mass-produced comics of all time.
Just like number one and all the other stuff in the 90s. It was big like that.
It will never be worth anything because there's too many of them running around, but it was really important, and people who don't know comics sometimes think, well, it's this really important issue, so I can hike the price up. Somebody will want it. Right. So, of course, I didn't get that one, but, I found it on a newsstand later. You know why? Because it was everywhere! And, so anyway, I have all these in singles. I want to say almost everything from Death of Superman all the way up through Reign of the Superman. I might be missing a couple things here and there. And then I just have this collected one, because this is kind of my reader copy, which I don't do many things with that way, but like I said, Death of Superman was such a big deal for me growing up. So it's going to be weird reviewing it, because I've never been forced to look at this critically.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to try my level best. I don't know if I'm capable of looking at this objectively, but I'm going to try. And I said that with Maximum Carnage, and then I just, ate it up and was like, well, this is wrong, and this is wrong. And then we got to the end, I was like, but I love it!
Yeah.
So, Dan, I'd love to know what your impression is of this, having not had the background and the love for this growing up that I had.
I think that this is definitely not a complete story. Like, this is definitely, like, we were saying before we were recording, you were talking about how this is like a disaster-type story where you have this big threat that Superman has to stop before it gets to a certain place, and he's chasing it. And that's basically what this is. And I think the most interesting things that you can do with the Death of Superman is the fallout of it. And they seeded some things here where there was a lot of people that were saying that Guy Gardner was a more well-liked superhero than Superman because he was hip and an attitude and stuff like that. And I feel like in the Funeral for a Friend stuff and later on stuff, that's one thing that's going to be addressed is, how relevant is Superman and all that kind of stuff. But I wouldn't recommend reading this all by itself just because it's just Superman and the Justice League chasing Doomsday. They get to Metropolis, they fight, and Superman dies. Like, the fighting is cool, the art's really great, there's some cool dialogue in here, nothing fantastic or mind-blowing, but it was fine. And the final fight with Doomsday and the caption boxes as Superman's passing away are touching. That's one of the things that I really, really enjoyed as a part of it, but other than that, I don't really have too much to say about it negatively. It's not a bad book. It's just not the full story.
I think a lot of the problems that the book might have for people reading it now are just circumstantial things that you couldn't possibly have known were going to be an issue when this was written. If you look at the documentary about the Death of Superman, or the Death of Superman on the Superman Doomsday DVD. I don't know if you've ever seen that, Dan.
No, I haven't.
It's I don't love that movie, so it's really the reason to buy that movie, I think, because there's this great like hour-long documentary about Death of Superman, and it's really cool. The whole thing is just Death of Superman. It talks about the impact that it had on the industry. It talks about the inception of it and how they got there. And what they talk about is how at the time they had 4 Superman books running concurrently. You and I have talked about this before.
Yeah.
And what they would do is all of the teams working on those books would periodically, not very often, get together in a room and kind of hammer out what kinds of stories they wanted to do, and that way they all kind of knew what each book was doing. Because it wasn't like the books were all done completely separately. The idea was to have a Superman book coming out every week. And in fact, they even at one point introduced a book called Man of Tomorrow that came out quarterly to fill in that 5th week that you would sometimes have in a month.
I didn't realize that. That's cool.
So that they made sure that you definitely had one every single week. And I think Man of Tomorrow ran like 14, 15, 16 issues is all it had, because it was quarterly and it only went for a few years.
Okay.
But anyway, so one of the things that they would sometimes throw out just as a joke is, hey, let's just kill him.
Yeah.
And they one day they decided to go ahead and do it, and it wasn't supposed to be this big huge deal. They didn't expect that they were going to get all this media coverage for it, and that people that have never read a comic book before were going to go out and buy the Death of Superman because it was such a big deal that they were killing him off. And but that's what happened, and so they had to print so many copies of this thing, and there were millions of copies of this printed, at least 1 million, if not quite a bit more. And I've heard 1 million, I've heard more than 1 million. I'm not sure, but it was a lot. And anyway, so what makes this a very strange read now, and for anybody that wasn't reading Superman at the time, is that the status quo for Superman is completely like nothing that you've ever seen before this or since this. You will not be comfortable in this world if you weren't reading any other DC comics around this, because nothing is familiar to you. Besides, Lois Lane and Jimmy Olsen are pretty much characterized. Everybody's characterized right, but like the status quo is all kind of weird. Honestly, it reminds me a little bit of Spider-Man now. In that, like, everybody's there, you kind of recognize people, but they're all in weird places. They're not where they usually are, you know what I mean? Kind of like having the Daily Bugle run by somebody else and called something else, and having, J. Jonah Jameson being the mayor of New York. There's stuff like that in this, where, okay, the whole Justice League is entirely different characters that you've probably never heard of before, with the exception of maybe Guy Gardner, if you've read anything current. And the only reason Guy Gardner is still around, I think, is because of this period, because he was popular during this. And during Green Lantern stuff through this, so he stuck around. But, you got characters in this, like Bloodwind, who the heck is that? You got characters like...
sort of
Fire, who's got this green costume, who's that? People like that.
Yeah.
And Maxima, who used to be kind of a villain and is now in the Justice League. What? And then you got strange things like Jimmy Olsen is moonlighting as a TV superhero called Turtle Boy.
Yeah. Yeah, it was sort of a nod to the Ninja Turtles, I thought.
Oh, absolutely, and of course the Turtles were huge in '92.
Yeah.
And then the biggest one is Lex Luthor is now Lex Luthor II and thinks he's a clone at this point. You find out later that he's actually real Lex, who just thinks he's a clone. He's not actually a clone, but here we think that he's a clone of Lex Luthor. And if you just read this and you haven't read anything before or after it, you'd even maybe think that Lex Luthor just had a son, because they talk about him like that. And like he's just like Lex Luthor's son, but he's actually supposed to be a clone who's not really a clone. So,
wasn't he not American in this too?
Yeah, he has an Australian accent.
How did he become Australian?
I don't remember, honestly. And then you have the weird thing with Supergirl, who is the Matrix Supergirl in this, and if you punch her in the face, her face turns into putty.
Yeah, and she sort of had a romantic thing going on with Lex, too, right?
Yeah, and that plays up a whole lot during Funeral for a Friend.
Like, I like Superman quite a bit, but I just haven't read a ton of it, and I was sort of unfamiliar going into this, and I sort of just had to fly by the seat of my pants and sort of accept the things they were throwing at me as they came along. just to enjoy the story. And I think if you're able to do that, it's decently accessible. I mean, there's things in here that are unfamiliar, but it's not like it's inherently connected to anything that you would need to know previously to get a full experience out of it.
I always felt like if they had expected that it would be the big popular thing that it ended up being, they would have gotten the status quo back to something a little more familiar.
Yeah, and I think it might have been a little bit more self-contained, too.
Absolutely, sure.
Maybe not including the Justice League as much in this.
And not just the Justice League, but having so much of the story take place in other people's books, too.
Right, exactly.
Because, of course, in this, it's in Justice League, and then after this, you have bits of Death of Superman, or Reign of the Superman, and Funeral for a Friend in other books also, you know.
Right,
throughout.
Yeah. I think if this was a crossover today, it probably would have been done as a mini or as a family crossover just between the Superman family of books, which is sort of what this was, but it did go into the other ones as well.
Yeah, and I felt like those other issues were kind of necessary. There are some things that I really like that they do just format-wise in this, just in how they organize it, that I wish we did more often today. The best thing is that at the beginning of some of these issues, they'll say, "Don't read this till you get this other one."
Yeah, I always enjoyed little notes like that. If you were a reader that was just picking up a book month to month, just that one alone, and then you somehow didn't know that this crossover was going on, I always used to appreciate those, especially when I would go get runs of back issues and be like, oh, I need to go buy a crossover in these other books.
I think they might have started getting the sense that this was going to be a big deal, and they wanted to make sure that people got to read the whole story. Again, I don't think they would have organized it this way had they known that they were going to get more than just the diehard Superman fans reading it, and more importantly, the current diehards. Because don't you think that a lot of people that went out and bought, especially just the ones that went out and bought Superman 75, probably some of them were probably older people who just wanted to see it.
Right, just people that were generally fans of Superman that might have left the comics for a while, people that enjoyed the films. Superman's such a big presence all around the world that when you kill him off in a comic book, and especially since this had never been done before, killing off the main character, a main superhero in a book, this definitely probably would have felt like it would have been a long-lasting thing back then, because there wasn't a ton of retconning of immediate continuity stuff back then with Marvel and DC. Like they would retcon things, but it would take a long time for them to sort of do things like that.
And sometimes they would just start over. They would just kind of reboot,
right? Yeah.
Like with Crisis, but they wouldn't. And of course, Marvel didn't do that. But I mean, like sometimes DC would just go, okay, we're too convoluted now. Let's start over. But you're right. They wouldn't very often do something like this. Although I think you did still have characters that had kind of died and been brought back to life. I think you probably already had that going on in comics, but not to this degree. Not with such a big character. And you couldn't be 100% sure at this point that if they killed off Superman, they'd bring him back, especially not right away. That maybe they would still publish Superman books eventually, but maybe they would be like just stories of him in the past, or they'd be self-contained things, but they wouldn't necessarily be like in continuity. No, Superman's dead now. Here's what some people don't realize, and I guess I'm making my part of this a little bit more of a history lesson, I guess, than reviewing this book, and we should get into a few things about it. But like you said, it's a very simple story, and it's pretty much just a giant disaster film in comic book form with Superman. So there's not a lot to say about this part of it. I'd have a lot to say if we got to Reign of the Supermen, which I think we should do at some point.
Yeah, we should.
If you can get your hands on more of it. But anyway, I get the sense that when they were writing this, they had every intention of bringing him back. It wasn't like we're going to kill him off and keep him dead. Their plan, I think, all along, and I might be wrong about this. It's been a while since I've read up on it, but I think that the plan all along was to do just what they did, which was kill him off and then not publish the books for a while, and then start publishing the books again, but without him in them. and then bring him back. And I mean, because it was like, well, you can't just not tell Superman stories in DC, you know? I mean, we want to do that. But I think that was the most respectful way to do it if they were going to bring him back, to not just do this gimmicky thing of, well, we'll bring him back in 6 months. I mean, like just straight up bring him back in 6 months. What they did was they used this as an excuse to tell what I think were some really interesting stories about what the world would be like if Superman was gone. And about people having to deal with the death of their friend, and the world having to deal with the death of this big protector and what that would be like. And they just published issue after issue without Superman, with people having to deal with that. And even if he came back, and even if you felt like it was too gimmicky, I think it was worth it just to get to tell those stories. I think that's really cool.
Yeah, I agree, and I definitely agree with you just based on how the stories went. I think the tagline, sort of Reign of the Superman, if I remember correctly, was they had all these Supermen that could have, like, one of them was supposed to be the real one that had come back to life or something, right? That was the whole premise of it, and you sort of had to figure out who it was. It was a mystery.
Yeah, although I don't think anybody ever really thought that any of them was actually Superman, because they played that up a little bit, but much more of it was, is any of them the real one? And that was the tagline most of the time that I saw when this was out, was, Superman is back, but is any of these four the real Superman? And of course, you knew right away that at least two of them couldn't possibly be. Because we got right away their origins. Right away, we knew that John Henry Irons was this guy who built a suit and decided, well, if Superman's not around, we need other people, wearing that symbol and doing what he did. And so nobody thought he was actually Superman. You can tell he's a big burly black bald guy just looking at his steel costume. You knew that wasn't Superman. And and he never professed to be Superman. He just wanted to use Superman as an example to how to live his life. By the way, I love John Henry Irons. I just love him. He's such a great character. I think that one of the great things about Death of Superman is that it produced so many of these really great characters that I think at this point are, dare I say, considered kind of iconic. And it's cool. 1992, we produced iconic characters out of killing off a character. Oh, love it. And then we also knew that Superboy wasn't Superman, because we knew he was a Cabot's clone. I want to say pretty much from the beginning. So then at that point, you only have the other two, Eradicator, who was a decent contender, and Cyborg, who was a decent contender except creepy. All the way through, and not just because of what his face looked like, but he always put off this air of, yeah, I'm pretending to be Superman, but I'm really gonna blow up a city. And then what did he do, Dan? He blew up a city. When I was reading this as a kid, the first thing I always wondered was why Superman couldn't just pick up Doomsday and fly him up into space. And that's actually what they do in Superman Doomsday, in the animated movie. What I like is they actually don't have him fly into space. The way he kills Doomsday is he actually flies him up into the air, and then he flies him right back down into the ground. And he kills him just by impact into the ground, which would have been fine, except that he went back to Metropolis.
Why would he do that?
I don't know. I thought that was really dumb, because it pretty much plunged him into the heart of Metropolis. I guess nobody died, but I don't understand. Anyway, what I like is, and I didn't remember this, because I went back to this thinking, oh man, I hope that's going to make sense. And it did. They actually come right out and tell you why he can't do that.
Yeah, they did.
They had this whole 2-page spread where he picks him up and he's flying him toward the sky, and he never says I'm gonna take him to space, but you get the sense that he's gonna fly him as high as he can fly him, and he's got some kind of a plan. But he's too strong; he can't hold him, and so he gets out of Superman's arms. So even though Superman can fly and Doomsday can't, and he's kind of at Superman's mercy if he gets him up into the air, he can't hold him. And so he got stuck just following Doomsday to wherever he was going to go and having to fight him there on his terms. that all worked. Now, let me ask you this, because I'm sorry, I'm doing a lot of talking right now, because this is just one of my favorite things.
No problem.
I have a lot to say, and I keep kind of waiting for you to interrupt me and say something more interesting. Do you feel like Doomsday is some people have described him as just a plot contrivance to have something that can kill Superman?
I mean, it didn't really bother me that he just kind of shows up and he's the thing that can kill Superman. I kind of wish that he had a character. That kind of bothered me, the fact that he was just sort of, a thug. He says a couple words and then he dies. I kind of miss that, but I like you were talking about, doing this sort of story is interesting to see the after effects anyway. So I think in the context of killing him here, it doesn't really bother me too much. Just because the reason I would do this story is for the after effects of this act of it anyway. I mean, there could have been other grandiose ways to kill him, possibly, you could argue that, but it didn't really bother me too much. I think one of the most important things to consider when you're reading this as a comic book fan who's been around for a while, who's experienced this death recycle thing over and over and over again, like Marvel and DC have been doing lately, is to have some sort of historical perspective about what you're reading when you pick this up. Because this is the first time it had ever really been done before. This is the story that set the sort of formula for it, and I think this is one of the ones that does it the best out of all of them, just because it deals with the after effects. It gives a valid reason for him dying. I think, like you said, everything related to how he's killed really works. It doesn't really have any plot holes or contrivances besides Doomsday himself, some would argue, in relation to him being killed. So, I don't know.
It's very unfortunate that this book, having such an effect on the comic book industry, has had as many or more negative effects as it has positive effects.
It's really unfortunate, isn't it?
Because I don't think it's fair to the people working on this book that they've
No,
garnered that reputation. Dan Jurgens, Jerry Ordway, these guys, Roger Stern, these guys didn't know that they were going to create this giant marketing ploy that would be used over and over again to sell books. That's not why they did this.
I know.
Well, we started off with an oversaturated comic book market that came out of this and other things in the early '90s. You had this, you had Spawn, you had books that were selling in the millions. You had Todd McFarlane's Spider-Man #1.
X-Men #1, X-Force #1.
And that led to all of these overly mass-produced variant covers, gimmicky covers, all those sorts of things, because the industry started realizing that it was collectible, and that people were buying comics not just to read them, but some people were buying them to invest in. And they thought that if they bought a book, that they could hold on to it for 10 or 20 years, it'd be worth a lot of money, and then they could sell it, and it was an investment. And that might have been true, except that because they realized that more people were buying them, they oversaturated the market, and then there wasn't a demand for them anymore when these collectors started catching on to the fact that the book that they just bought for $2 would be worth $2 20 years from then. And so Death of Superman has that legacy also. So because of that, so partially, not completely, but so partially because of Death of Superman, we almost destroyed the entire comic book market, and we also ended up with constantly killing off characters and bringing them back in a few months and continuing to try to sell comics and make gimmicky covers based on it. And it also is sometimes blamed, number 3, for the constant onslaught of big event books that we get every year from the big 2 companies. So this book ended up being a death trap for the industry, and it's really good, and it's really unfair that it got that it's had that legacy. And thank God the comic book medium survived it.
Yeah, I think it is really unfair to shoulder all the blame of all of those things happening after this, especially in relation to like companies like Marvel doing it. I mean, I think it's just a matter of the companies stealing each other's ideas and not being able, and just cashing in on things instead of telling good stories rather than this story specifically being responsible for all that stuff, you know.
Yeah, I'm not saying it's to blame for that in entirely.
Oh yeah, I'm agreeing with you.
Okay, yeah, I really don't think it is. I just think that that it gets that reputation.
Yeah, definitely.
And that's not fair. That's unfortunate.
Oh, it's not, because this is good work. It's definitely all set up, like we were saying before. Definitely Act 1, and I kind of wish that this trade, because it's so slim and because the Reign of the Superman one is so thick, that they had just collected this in 2 volumes, where Death of Superman and Funeral for a Friend were in 1, and then Reign of the Superman was volume 2, instead of splitting it into 3, where it's 2 skinny trades and 1 gigantic one.
I think they had a valid reason for doing it. I agree with you. I wish they had done it that way too. This was a $5 trade.
I didn't even realize that, because I bought it secondhand at a convention.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Price.
And I think that the reason they didn't collect it all together like that was because they wanted the people who didn't go out and buy 75 but wanted to read the whole story. And I'm just surmising this. I could be wrong. But my guess is, I mean, how often even in 1992 did you see a $5 trade? I think...
It's a odd period back then.
There were some, but you're right. I think it was just to make it more accessible, you know, so that people that heard about it and everybody did, because it was this big huge thing, would get to go read the whole story, or at least the whole death of part. And if you put Funeral for a Friend in it, it would have been at least 10 or 12 or $14.
Yeah, definitely. I can see definitely for the time. Maybe it's kind of unfair to complain about how they collected it back when it first came out, because they probably wanted to get it out as fast as possible, so people, like you said, who weren't able to get first printings or whatever of the issue could read it. But now that we're getting nice printings of Nightfall in huge volumes and with better paper quality and better colors and stuff, I really wish they'd do new printings of this as well, because this and Nightfall, I think, are DC's 2 big things in the 90s. So it'd be nice to get it sort of remastered and reprinted.
That's right. Well, and at the time, this was, as one collected work, considered just a graphic novel, and it was actually apparently, because I saw this on a lot of things, apparently it was the highest selling graphic novel of all time at the time, and I'm not sure what finally beat that. I'm sure Watchmen has since eclipsed it, because it has always been in print. Watchmen's never been out of print, ever. That's the only way DC can keep their rights to it, is to never... I don't know if you know that, but the rights go back to Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons if they don't, so they just keep it in print all the time. But anyway, I love all of the artwork in this. There's not a bit of this I don't like. I think it's very consistent.
I think it's consistent on both sides, writing and art. I think the artists complement each other very well. Their styles are similar, so it wasn't jarring going from issue to issue, book to book. And the writers were very consistent, I think, too, in their voices for the characters and the continuity. And the stories flowed really well, too. They didn't feel jarring to go from issue to issue. It was almost like you were picking up the scene right after when you would transition between issues.
And Dan, after all this 90s stuff we've been reviewing lately, isn't it refreshing to get to the next issue in a trade or reading everything together and not having to wade through 4 pages of this is what happened last time?
Oh, it was great. I loved that. There were some little narration boxes that said, you know, that mentioned things that had happened in previous scenes, but then there was just a little asterisk at the bottom that said, go read this issue to find out what happened, and I liked that. That's the way you should do it.
Yeah, they wouldn't give you too much of that. There wasn't a crazy amount of words on every page with a lot of, unneeded stuff. I felt like there were some unnecessary thought balloons here and there. Mm-hmm. Where somebody would be thinking, and I would find myself, and this was, kind of the time. We had a lot of this back then, but I mean, somebody would be thinking, and you'd be like, I don't know if I need to be in that person's head at this particular moment. But there were narration boxes that told you what was going on in the action scenes that you could see before your eyes in the panels. They didn't do that, so that was nice.
Yeah, and I thought it was really cool in here how they focused on Superman's effect on some of the regular people in Metropolis before killing him off. I thought it was really interesting to see, especially the kid that likes Superman and the kid who didn't like Superman, and their contrasting views, and how at the end of the day, the kid who really loved Superman, there was nothing that Superman could do for him, and Superman ended up saving the kid that didn't like him. I thought that was an interesting little thing that they put in there. It wasn't a huge part of the story, but I thought it was a nice little foreshadow of things to come with Funeral for a Friend.
I really enjoyed the fact that you got to see the police trying to do things in this.
Yeah.
Contrasting this to Maximum Carnage, which we did last time, which, you know, it's not until issue 7 when finally you see a SWAT team and they just get killed real quick. Here, you've got Maggie Sawyer and Dan Turpin together trying to get the police and the National Guard and all these people together to go up against Doomsday, knowing they probably can't do anything but doing their best anyway. You've got Doomsday breaking helicopter after helicopter, and these people just keep coming and they keep trying, and I thought that was really great. I really liked that we got to see kind of the human aspect of this. You know, people trying to protect their city even if it was a lost cause, and never admitting that it was. Just doing their best. Going through the motions, going, this is our job, we're going to do it, and you know, with the sense of bravery that I got the sense came from the fact that they were so used to having Superman around, that the idea is this is later Superman. He's led by example for years, and it worked. And these people have, and a lot of the people in law enforcement now seem to kind of have his ideals about things. That's good. Sure. I like that.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that as well, and it's really great that they had that in there, especially since after they kill him, it's going to, you know, shatter their entire perception of, you know, reality, basically. It's going to rock their world, so it'll be interesting to see when we go through the other books how many of the characters that we were introduced to here, like the kid whose mom got saved and the one that got kidnapped, whether or not they'll be included later on, because I'm kind of fuzzy on it, because I haven't read that in a while, so we'll have to see.
I didn't remember if he came back either. I did want to note, because it's funny, that this kid's name is Mitch.
Yeah.
And I never thought of this before, but this time reading it, I found myself, and I'm sure this is not true, but I found myself going, I wonder if that's maybe supposed to be Mitch Shelley, Resurrection Man? I'm sure it's not, but he sort of looks like him in the face a little bit. He's got kind of similar hair. And Resurrection Man was published a few years after this, and I wondered, like, does this kid grow up and become Mitch Shelley? And what's really, because we don't get a last name for him, and in this, and what's fun is Mitch Shelley has amnesia. He doesn't know his past.
Oh, wow, that's cool.
So even if it wasn't intended, it's possible.
That's awesome.
At least it's possible at that point. Now, I haven't read all of 52 Resurrection Man, and I know that they gave more of his past in that, so it's possible that it's not possible now. But anyway, I just thought I'd throw that out there, because I was going, wait a minute, Mitch,
that is very cool.
Is it possible? That's hilarious.
Was that Abnett and Lanning who worked on that?
Abnett and Lanning,
if any of the people who were involved in this worked on Resurrection Man as well.
I don't think they did, because I know Abnett and Lanning didn't do any of this, so...
Right.
So yeah, I don't think so. I want to talk about Doomsday for a minute, because you mentioned this earlier. You said that you kind of wished that Doomsday had more of a character. In this by itself, looking at it as just a standalone thing, I would have thought the very same thing. Reading ahead and knowing more about it, it ends up being okay, at least for me, because again, this is a disaster piece, and Doomsday is a force of nature. He's not a character. I think that if Doomsday had been given any kind of actual characterization in this, where you felt like he was a sentient being and not just a monster rampaging, that it may not have worked as well, just because at that point you would have had to have done something thematic with his character beyond just he's a force of nature that Superman has to stop. And then later on, you find out, if you read, the later Doomsday stuff, that he actually is a force of nature, and that he was built as a weapon, as a living weapon, by some aliens that had figured out how to create a creature that would come back from anything they threw at him. So he would die, and then he'd come back, and you could never kill him that way again. You couldn't kill him twice, and that's the thing is that's his superpower. You can't kill him the same way twice, and he always comes back. And what's kind of fun is that he's got that ability, And that's how Superman dies, is that he gets killed by something that always comes back.
Oh, yeah. That's interesting.
And that's why he's going to come back. So, now, I don't know if they had all that designed when they wrote this, because that's all stuff we learn later, well after Superman gets resurrected. But once you know it, I think it fits really well. I think it's interesting. Something I loved about the beginning of this, if I read this issue by itself, I would have hated it. The first part of this, what is that? Man of Steel 17.
The first issue of the story?
Of this trade, yeah. I would have hated this by itself because it's just a basic throwaway, Superman saves some people from some subterranean monsters, the end. And you have Doomsday, and you see Doomsday getting out of his underground prison. And that's all that happens in it. Turns out, when you get to the end of the book, that's actually kind of neat, because you see Superman very easily dispatch of some monsters at the beginning of the book, having no idea he's about to go up against a monster he can't beat.
Yeah, that is very cool. And they show up later on in the book, too, don't they?
Yeah, I think so.
If I remember correctly.
Well, do they? Yeah, they do, for briefly.
Yeah. I kind of forget what they were doing, but,
well, they're not real important. I think we just see them again because they're in this. But yeah, I think they're just trying not to die. But I don't remember. But
one of the things that I thought was a cool device in here that you reminded me of when I was looking through the first issue is I really liked how Doomsday had that green suit on, and you didn't really know what he looked like fully until, you know, a little bit of his suit got ripped every time you went through one of the issues. It was a really cool device where it made him almost a little bit more scary because you didn't know what he looked like until, fully at least, until he came into contact with Superman at the end.
Yeah, I agree with you. That's one of the things I always really liked about it as a kid, and always kind of hated that there were all these solicitations everywhere in the books that showed him.
Oh, really?
Yeah, you saw his full face and like the bones and everything well before they finally revealed him, and I wish they hadn't done that.
Yeah, that's disappointing. See, I didn't realize they spoiled things like that back in the 90s.
Yeah, if I'm remembering right, they did. And again, my memory could be a little bit off because this was 20 years ago. But that's how I remember it. And there are, I gotta say, there are a few little inconsistencies here and there. Not giant plot holes, but things that took me out a little bit. And because I'm trying to be objective reviewer guy, I feel the need to mention them. One of them is, and this is hilarious, is that Booster Gold both names Doomsday and then later forgets that he named Doomsday.
Oh yeah, he kind of says it twice, doesn't he?
Yeah, and it's weird that it's the same character, because what he does, and it seems like it was just an inconsistency between two writers that like weren't, you know, watching each other. Yeah, they were out of sync a little bit. You've got this part where Booster Gold says like it's like Doomsday, and then later on Superman is like, "What did you call him?" "Oh yeah, Doomsday." You know, it's like this really overly dramatized bit of just naming it because we need a name for this guy. And what's funny about it is I never thought that Booster Gold was actually calling him Doomsday. That it was just like oh god, things are so bad right now with this monster we might not be able to beat. It's like it's Doomsday, and then Superman's like, no, that's a catchy name. Let's use that. But
yeah, there was a lot of characters that kept sort of referring to the situation or him as Doomsday. But then, it was really kind of goofy.
Later, there's a part where Booster Gold, and I looked to make sure it was him, actually says this creature that the media have dubbed Doomsday. You named him that first, dude. Isn't that bizarre?
Yeah, I didn't even notice that.
Yeah, I'm gonna look again and make sure that I read that right, because I did a double take when that happened. I was like, wait, really? But I thought you named him. What? Another thing that I think is funny, and this isn't a problem, but it's amusing. Did you notice that there is not a product that anyone uses in this book that doesn't have the word Lex in it?
Like, yeah, I kind of noticed that.
There's a Lexmart. And there's like a Lex oil rig. It's just everything has Lex in it.
Yeah, I thought that was cool though.
I was surprised we didn't see somebody drinking like a Lex Cola.
Yeah. speaking of Lex, I was sort of surprised that he didn't have a bigger role in this than he did. He was just sort of there, you know?
Yeah, well, I think that part of that is because Lex at this point is supposed to be again. If you haven't read anything around this, you wouldn't know this. But the idea is he's not evil right now. He's not the Lex we all know, or at least we don't think that he is. He's kind of the closest to benevolent Lex we ever get. And he's kind of biding his time trying to decide how he can best help Metropolis.
Oh, okay.
And that's why he doesn't do anything yet, because he's not like, you know, if this was original Lex, he would have taken advantage of the situation somehow. But this is
Right.
Lex Luthor II. He's trying to decide what he can do to help, and finally he goes, yeah, okay, Supergirl, go help Superman. And the thing is, he gets, if I remember correctly, he gets kind of more devious as time goes on, and he begins to have dreams where he has memories of the real Lex and realizes that he actually is real Lex. I love that moment where Superman says, you know, if Lex Luthor the First was still around, I would have thought that maybe he would have had engineered this monster.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that that's picked up on later on, because in the movie Superman Doomsday, they actually have LexCorp people dig up Doomsday from underground, and they actually kind of do that, yeah, so.
That's very cool. One of the things that I thought of when I was reading this, because I hadn't really read this in a while in relation to Doomsday again, was just how similar power-wise and look-wise, besides the bones, he was to the Hulk. I thought he was really similar.
That's true, I never thought of that, but I guess I should have.
Yeah, the way he leaps. See, I was kind of fuzzy on the way his powers worked, but you had sort of explained to me before we started talking. But when Superman was like, are you growing stronger? It was like, oh, he gets stronger over time like the Hulk. He can leap like the Hulk. He's big and gray like the Hulk.
Yeah, he gets stronger because he comes back from everything.
Oh, yes, yeah. I remember you were explaining that to me. But that was just what I was thinking when I was reading it, you know?
One of the things that this book also gets a lot of positive credit for, and that I really love, is the panel layouts. That when you get to the last 4 issues, that are pretty much just Superman finally having the big drag-down fight with Doomsday. It starts with, the first part of that has 4 panels on each page. And then the next one has 3 panels on each page. And then the one after that has just 2 on each page, and then when you get to the final one, every single page is a full-page spread.
Yeah, that entire fight is fantastic. That scene where he's finally dead, it's just so touching, and so it has a sense of finality to it. Even if you know that Superman's going to come back eventually and all that stuff, you know, just retrospectively, it's just a really powerful scene.
It's really effective, yeah.
Yeah.
It's actually kind of cooler if you read it in singles, or if you read 75 by itself, rather, because when you get to that last page, it's actually a full 4-page fold-out.
That's cool.
And so they have to separate it up in this. All the art's there, but they separate it into 4 separate pages. It's actually one full fold-out.
And yeah, you were talking about the panel layouts and stuff and the way that they pace the final fight. I thought that this entire book, in general, the layout-wise and art-wise, was very, very well paced. Just the sense of urgency that comes through in the story and the artwork when Doomsday's heading towards Metropolis is very effective. You always feel like, you know, Superman's running out of options, and you get to see Superman at a point where he's at the end of his rope and he doesn't really have any options left. It's really interesting to see him get to that point. And
you buy it because you've been watching him do this for so long. I mean, usually
exactly.
You wouldn't want to see a fight this long, but this one you want to. You want to see every single thing that Superman has to deal with.
Right, exactly, and that's what's so effective about it, and why I wasn't bored with it, even though it's just in basically a bunch of fights where, sort of like Maximum Carnage, like we were sort of talking about, where there's these big fights in the middle of it where we're like, oh, we're kind of bored, you know, but this was very, very it was structured exactly like that, but it was more concise, and I think it was a lot more effective.
Well, the fights all meant something. In Maximum Carnage, it seems like they repeat themselves a lot. It's like, okay, well, haven't we kind of done this fight already? And like, where is this going? And sometimes it doesn't go anywhere. It meanders. This doesn't do that. With this, every fight means something, and also there's like, you could map Doomsday's path.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? If you wanted to, like, if you could come up with a map for like Metropolis and the cities around it.
Congratulations.
You could, jeez. You could, if you wanted to, you could map that out, and then you'd see that, you know, it's not just a bunch of random fights. It's periodically superheroes show up and try to fight Doomsday, and then they get knocked down.
Right.
I wish that, again, this had been done in a time where we could have had some of the more recognizable heroes that we care more about get to fight Doomsday, and
right, that would have been really cool.
See them all get taken out. And had I been, you know, Bruce Timm and his team, nothing against them, but you know, I didn't love the Superman Doomsday movie. That's what I would have done with that. I would have made it this plus the regular Justice League.
That would have been really interesting to see people like the Flash and Batman to go up against Doomsday.
Yeah, and I mean, you know, Batman's in Funeral for a Friend. Some of those characters show up, but I guess they have better things to do that day. What's nice is this is not a big, broad scoping thing like Maximum Carnage, where it goes over very much time. I think Maximum Carnage is kind of a short thing too, day wise. You wouldn't know it reading it, but with Death of Superman, it's one day. And I think it's very important to remember that, because, I mean, not only is the character called Doomsday, but Superman dies on Doomsday. You actually see, there's such a good attention to detail in this. I don't know if you noticed this, Dan, but you see it get darker outside as the book progresses.
Really? I didn't notice that. That's cool.
You kind of do, and by the end, I mean, I don't know how hard they were paying attention to that. Of course, you do have a lot of panels where you don't really see a lot of background, because it's the 90s, and some of that is in here. I don't love that, but boy, those last few issues, it's dark now, and it was bright and chipper in the morning at the beginning of this, you know, and so that's really cool. It takes place over the course of a single day, and realistically, Batman might not have gotten there in time. You know, another character might not have gotten there in time. Maybe they even tried. It would have been really cool. I don't think this was done. Wouldn't it have been cool if you had a flashback in an issue somewhere, or like they put out an issue that took place earlier, where like one of Superman's friend superheroes is like rushing to get there, you know, to help him fight Doomsday, and then he gets there and he's off to the side, and you see him looking on as Superman's dead, and looking at his, you know, at his ripped up cape flapping, and yeah, you know, I always imagined that maybe there were characters like that. They couldn't get there in time. It happened too fast.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't even think of that, and that's just a testament again to how well paced and how well written this is, because with a lot of these events, with character specific ones, now, like in Marvel, where everyone's an Avenger, or in DC, where Superman is a main member of the Justice League, you're always thinking, well, they have this big problem. Why aren't they there helping them solve the problem? This problem could be over in a matter of 3 minutes if they show up.
Yeah. And
this is a valid reason for them not being there, and you see the actual Justice League get their butts handed to them by Doomsday. So it addresses all of those problems and makes it work. I really appreciate that.
Well, Dan, I got to tell you, you enjoyed this more than I thought you would.
Yeah, I mean, I really did enjoy it quite a bit. It definitely, like we said, I definitely wouldn't recommend just reading this, but if you know what's going to happen later, you know there's going to be good payoff for the cool stuff that happens in there, I'd definitely recommend giving it a shot.
Yeah, at the very least, if this is all you can get your hands on, you know, do yourself a favor after you read it and read up a little bit on what happens later, just so that you can get more of an appreciation of what this was doing. And, you know, we may as we go along...
Congratulations!
I gotta fix that. We may...
It's relentless.
Yeah, I know, it is. Well, the only reason I haven't closed this out is because I was uploading a video.
Oh, okay.
Anyway. Dan, we may find as we go along that there are, you know, some things plot-wise that we don't love about Reign of the Supermen and stuff like that. But you're right in that this is kind of set up, and it's you don't really want to just see Superman die and not see the aftermath of it. But that's what's so cool is that the aftermath it really is the interesting part. And what's interesting about this is seeing how it happens. But it's not it's not really a story so much as an event, and not an event like capital letter event, but an event in that you're seeing, it's like watching every second of a car collision.
Right, exactly,
and it's enjoyable, if I can even say that in that sense,
right. I'd sort of compare it for people that are Batman fans to the Death in the Family, where Jason Todd's death is a great scene, but that whole book isn't necessarily a story that's all that entirely engaging and interesting. But what that story, that event, Jason Todd dying, does for Batman's character is very interesting. The fallout of all of that is the interesting stuff. So this is sort of the same thing, I would say. Just getting to see what the world would be like without Superman. It's such a almost depressing notion,
Oh yeah, it is, and was very edgy at the time. Because Superman was such a very optimistic kind of book all the time. And I feel like that optimism resonates here. But then, the good guy dies at the end. And then you have to see what things are like after that. And then when we get into Funeral for a Friend and some of the later stuff, we get some really interesting things like people seeing Superman as a Christ figure to the point of actually thinking that he is that he's Jesus and he's going to rise again. You get these different religious factions that think that one of the Superman over the other one is actually, and you got like cults following Eradicator and the Cyborg, and really fascinating kinds of stuff that you might expect might arise in the real world. So,
right.
So yeah, I think it's definitely worth your time, and I'm glad we got this opportunity to talk about it, Dan. This is something I've been wanting to do for a really long time, and I'm glad that a really appropriate moment arose to talk about it. So,
yeah, definitely, and it's definitely sort of an apt time to talk about this too, because a lot of people lately have been questioning the sort of relevance of Superman. Maybe not lately, but just for
the last
a long time.
Years, sure.
And I think it's very fitting, looking at this as a way to validate Superman's existence. Getting to see without him what the DC universe would be like, what the face of it would be like, and it's not a pretty sight.
Yeah.
People are left without a symbol to aspire to and look to people like Eradicator, like you were saying, and that's a scary notion.
Yeah, because he goes around and kills people with with that S on his chest, right? Well, we'll definitely talk more about that when we get to Funeral for a Friend, and
for sure.
That'll be really fun.
Yeah, I'm hoping so. I haven't read the entire Reign of the Supermen stuff, so I'm definitely looking forward to going back and checking some of that stuff out.
Cool. We'll do it. Well, there's another thing to put on our list, Dan, of things we have to review, and I don't know how soon that'll be because Dan's still got to get his hands on all that stuff. But we'll definitely do that down the line. And we're planning to keep doing this video game thing, so we're actually going to do the Death and Return of Superman video game. Also,
fun, huh?
And I think we'll do that pretty soon.
I think that should be fun.
On a superhero replay. Well, everybody, thanks a lot for watching the Comic Book Vault. Dan, thanks again for joining me, and thanks for talking so long about Death of Superman.
Oh, no problem. I really enjoyed it, and thanks for having me. It was a good time.
Everybody, I apologize for the length of this, but it's Death of Superman. I had to give it its day. I had to give it its Doomsday, Dan. If there's anything you'd ever like to see me review on the Comic Book Vault, something that you've got sitting around that you don't want anymore, or something you want to let me borrow and have sent back to you, you can always send things to the P.O. Box. That's Geekvolution, P.O. Box 14183, Lenexa, Kansas 66285. I'm Captain Logan.
And I'm Dan.
And we'll see you next time.